first of all, let's go back to late 1945. I gave the folks a little bit of background about you. Late 1945, you're in Walterboro, South Carolina. You just finished your first solo flight in the P-47 Thunderbolt, which is a 17,000-pound fighter plane. So for our aviation nerds, as I call them, twin R-2800 radial engines, and quite a honking piece of equipment. Yes, Dr. Richardson?
Yes, right. 7 tons.
So tell us about what that day was like.
Well, it was quite exciting for me, just realizing that I was in a P-47 that I had read about years ago. Going like 250 miles an hour. And that to me was quite exciting. You know, I felt it in my stomach, and it was quite exciting.
Okay. And what was the weather like on that day?
It was a good weather day for South Carolina. There may have been some clouds, but nothing to be concerned about. Okay.
And your instructors, prior to them cutting you loose for your solo flight, do you remember what the instructor pilot's words were to you?
Well, he talked about propeller settings and power settings.
Okay.
We'd gone through some stuff in briefing, but once I was in the airplane, he talked about power settings and propeller settings and so forth.
So for our audience who's joining us this morning, let me give you a little bit of background. As I said, my name is Victor Castro. This is Mainline Weekend. We have Dr. Eugene Richardson joining with us today. It's difficult to understand this, but imagine if you were taking a driver's test in your car and there was only one seat in your car. And the previous car you had 2 seats because that's where your instructor was, but now they're going to put you into something almost completely foreign that was not made to have 2 seats, that has 1 seat. And they give you some settings, you start the engine up, and off you go. So Dr. Richardson, what was that like, strapping the P-47 to you for the first time?
Well, there are a number of things you had to remember. That engine was so powerful that you had to lock the tail wheel so the airplane wouldn't swerve or anything. So lock the tail wheel, push up the throttle, and I think it would take off at like at 120 miles an hour. You'd feel the tail come up, and once the tail came up, you ease back on you don't pull the stick, you ease back on the stick, and then the nose would go up. And when you clear the ground, you pull up the landing gear.
Yeah.
And after you're up about 500 feet, you can bring up the flaps.
Okay.
Flap zero.
Flap zero. I know that term well. If I can get you to bring the phone down just a little bit, and if you can speak up just a little bit, we can get our audience to hear you a little bit better. So just point your phone down towards your face. Put your head towards the top of the screen, please. Right about there. Perfect. So everybody in the military knows that for every hour of flying, there's probably a couple of hours of briefing before and at least an hour of debrief afterwards, where you go through your statistics and see how your landing was, whether you stayed in formation, you went through all the fuel calculations, whether you made it to your rally point, all those things, correct?
Correct,
Now, once you were done with the debrief, some other things happened later on in the day that were kind of shocking. So let's take you back to that day after solo, and you go into the mess hall on base at Walterboro, South Carolina. Can you tell me what that experience was like?
Well, you tell the guys how you felt. I made the mistake of sticking my head out. I wanted to see what it felt like, what the breeze was like. I made the mistake of sticking my head out, and the wind ripped my goggles off.
You made
that again.
Okay, I need to get you to speak up just a little bit more so I can hear you more clearly.
Okay, I stuck my head out of the cockpit like a dummy, and the wind ripped the goggles off.
Well, that wasn't too good. So let's talk about the chow hall, though. There were two separate entrances at the chow hall on base, correct? At Walterboro.
Yes.
So let's talk about that. What was the effect of that? There were German prisoners, POWs, at the base also?
Yes, at the base, yes.
And you had two separate entrances?
Well, for the PX, there were separate entrances.
For the PX, okay.
Post-exchange,
Okay. And what were the designations of those two entrances?
Well, one was colored and one was white.
All right. And what was the mood on the base while this was all going on back in 1945?
Well, there had been some trouble up at a base up near Detroit, and they had forcefully tried to integrate the officers' club in Detroit. So they moved a lot of those guys down to Walterboro.
Okay.
And to avoid any trouble with the officers' club at Walterboro, they moved the officers' club off the base.
Wow, that must have been created a little bit of tension on base, correct?
Well, they knew that. Yeah, well, it did. Now, of course, they knew that we weren't going to try to go into a white club off base, so that's why they moved the officers' club to off base.
Okay, so let's talk about your interactions amongst your squadron mates. This was a training. This was Group Echo, Group E, or Squadron E, Squadron Echo of your training command. Give me a paint a picture of some of the personalities that you had within your group.
Well, we were all very close guys. We had been together for a number. We've gone through flight schools together, and prior to that, we were basic training together. So we were a cohesive group. We were quite friendly with each other, quite respectful of each other. Always cheered each other on, always complimented each other on jobs well done when things were done well, and they were most of the time. They complimented each other on their formation flying or landings or something of the sort. So we got along quite well.
Excellent. And the command in your training command back in 1945, there was a rule or operational practice of, even in the all-black units, they had mostly European descent officers running the ranks.
Yeah, well, those guys had combat experience. So
they had combat experience.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the instructor pilot that had the biggest impact on you.
Well, there was one white guy whose home was in Walterboro. That was his standard home, and he interacted. He was quite friendly with us. He didn't interact well. As a matter of fact, they later named it Memorial Park after him.
Well, it probably was very helpful to have that experience coming back in, and that was probably a contributing factor to the level of success of the Tuskegee Airmen.
Later on, some of our guys came back from combat, and they became instructors. But initially, for all European guys that had combat experience, that were instructing us.
Okay. So let's go back a little bit further. Let's go way back now. 5 years old. You're with your father at an air show. And we talked a little bit about this with Melissa Jacobs. That inspired you to become a pilot.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that experience.
We get out to this field, and there are these things up in the air. Well, I'm accustomed to seeing birds in the air, all naturally. We get out to the field, and these things are up there like birds, and you hear the engines running. You see them climbing and diving and turning and rolling and doing things. And then they come down and they land, and people get out of them. That was the very most surprising thing to me. I'd never seen an airplane on the ground before. And then these things land and people get out of them. And then I said, oh, man, that must be some fantastic stuff, being up there like a bird. So from then on, I wanted to fly an airplane.
So those folks, when they got out of the plane, they must have appeared like giants to you.
Oh, super giants.
Super giants.
Yeah.
And what was the name of the squadron or the group that was flying around?
They call themselves the Blackbirds.
The Blackbirds. And why were they called the Blackbirds?
Well, that's what they call themselves.
All right. But what was their background? This was 1929, correct?
Yeah, about that. Yes. Well, they had been going around the country putting on these air shows.
And they were of African American descent, correct?
Yes. Without question, yes.
So for those of you who don't know, one of the first African American female aviators was Bessie Coleman. We also had Eugene Bullard, who flew with the Lafayette Escadrille, went overseas and flew for the French, for the expeditionary forces there. And that paved the way for Dr. Eugene Richardson to get into this program. Let's go to 17 years old. You're in high school. December 7th, 1941. Day that will live in infamy, correct?
Yeah, well...
Because you were doing dishes, right?
That was a Sunday. And
that was a Sunday.
Even though I had four sisters, so I had 8 sisters. There were 4 older sisters.
Yeah.
And my sister, we all take our turns doing household chores. So it just happens that Sunday, December 7th, was my turn to do dishes. Sunday, do the dishes. Sunday dinner, big dinner, a lot of pots and pans. So I'm in the kitchen cleaning pots and pans, and I hear the announcement over the radio that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. I said, oh boy, we're going to be at war now. And I figured that would be an opportunity for me to perhaps get into the Air Force.
So
I don't realize how serious the war would be, but my thought was getting into the Air Force.
Now, where were you living at the time, Dr. Richardson?
Toledo, Ohio.
Toledo, Ohio.
Yeah.
All right. And let's bring us back to center for those of you just joining us. My name is Victor Castro. This is Mainline Weekend. We have Dr. Eugene Richardson, Tuskegee Airman, on this Memorial Day weekend. So, Dr. Richardson, you're 17 years old, and you find out there's some exams that are going to be coming up, and you want to serve. So take us through that process.
Well, I was working with a guy that was servicing music machines, and for some reason the police stopped his car, and at that time you had to have when I was 18, of course, you had to have a draft card. When you're 18, you had to register for the draft. So the policeman asked for ID, and when he got to me, I said, well, I don't have a draft card because I'm only 17. I said, when I go into service, I want to be a pilot. He said, well, you can go down and take an exam now. And if you qualify, instead of drafting you, they'll put you on track to go to flight school. Well, by now I'm in Philadelphia. We moved to Philadelphia, so I go to the customs house at 2nd and Chestnut Street in Philadelphia.
Well, I used to live down there.
Oh, really? Well, I took the exam, and I was put on the reserve list for. I was designated as a pre-aviation cadet. I got a special badge to wear, pre-aviation cadet, and shortly after I turned 18, I got a telegram to come down to the to the what turned out to be an armory in Camden. Go to an armory in Camden, and there I was sworn in. And the guy said, "You hear from us shortly." So a short time after that, I was called back, and they gave me a bridge token, a train ticket, and told me to report to Biloxi Field, Biloxi, Mississippi. A couple of days later, so I was on a Pullman car going down south. I'd heard about all kinds of things happening on trains, but I was sitting in it was a compartment or something with a white lady, and I guess they thought I was her man Friday. So the guy didn't bother. I even slept on a bunk above her. And I was expecting all sorts of horrible things to happen, but nothing occurred. Nothing onerous occurred. And I get to Keesler Field at night, at 9 o'clock at night, I think. And there was an Army truck that they were waiting for us. A couple of us got on this Army truck, and they took us to Keesler Field. That was the beginning of my Army life. They took us to the mess hall. We had a snack with coffee, with Army coffee. Yeah, boy. First time I had that. And that was my life as a soldier.
So you started your initial training. What was the first phase of your initial training? Primary?
Well, Keesler Field now is a basic training field. Basic training and classification. And the first thing you have to learn to do is how to get all that sand out of your shoes. Like you're being on a beach, extremely sandy. And you always have a shoe full of sand. And the training there was, how to march, how to have the manual of arms, how to handle your rifle, right shoulder, the left shoulder, port, and all that kind of stuff. And just basic marching and drilling and crawling. Later went to the rifle range and learned how to shoot the gun if they had a rifle range. But it was just everyday soldier stuff,
Now, I prior to you getting on board here with us, and for those of you just joining us, my name is Victor Castro. This is Mainline Weekend. We have Dr. Eugene Richardson with us. I talked about some of the qualities that make good fighter pilots. And what we found is that fighter pilots tend to be good athletic people. And then we also have hunting abilities or shooting abilities. So there's a lot of crossover between hunters, football players, athletes, and fighter pilots. It's a very physical world that we live in over there. Correct? So I have a question from one of our guests on board. What made you want to serve when you were treated unfairly?
Well, my main concern was being able to fly. The unfair treatment didn't occur to me so much as my desire to fly an airplane. But later on, you realize that they had this negative attitude about black people. We used to get the Pittsburgh Courier. The Pittsburgh Courier came out once a week, I believe. And it carried articles about segregation and how blacks were perceived. And the notion was that black men didn't have the ability to do certain things. So we were interested in proving to ourselves that we could be pilots, plus proving to the world that we could be military pilots.
Mm-hmm.
You were constantly looking at the papers to see how things were going on.
And my understanding from the folks that I've spoken to, the competition was like most people who enter into the military and go into war. You don't necessarily fight for the things that are outside of you. You fight for the person that's standing next to you. Was that also common in your group?
Well, you knew that the guys going to be protecting you, so you did all you could to protect them. So you sort of worked for each other.
Yeah.
We had in school we had the slogan: you have to collaborate to graduate. So we worked together.
Yeah, and for those of you who are not that familiar with aviation, there's a lot of training that goes on. And I'm going to ask Dr. Eugene Richardson about some of the various types of training. So let's talk about your training regimen. You had radio work, you had, so besides the regular military stuff, marching, left, right, shooting, infantry work, you went into your advanced training. And now you have to learn, what are those things you had to learn?
In advance?
In advance. So Morse code, did you have to do radio telegraphy, navigation?
We had Morse code. We had a Morse code class, yes. Morse code, navigation, meteorology, physics, a full schedule of classroom work.
And you came at this after coming out of high school. Let's put this back in perspective. You were 18 years old when you started this, correct?
Yeah, but I had not finished high school. In Toledo, Ohio, I was going to a vocational school.
Yeah.
My father was a minister, so he went to a church in Camden, New Jersey. And in Camden, that vocational school did not teach the course that I was taking in Toledo. So I dropped out of day school and went to a night school to a manpower training program. They taught this course in a manpower training program, a vocational school at 22nd and Lehigh. The name of that school. Oh, Dobbins Vocational School, 22nd and Lehigh. They had a manpower training program there at night. So I continued that program at night. But then once I went into service without having a standard high school diploma. But a lot of the guys not only had finished high school, but several of the guys even had a year or two in college. The guy that stood next to me, his name was Robinson. He finished a year at Cornell, and I hadn't even finished high school. But
that philosophy still carries through today, correct? I mean, we used to say all boats rise in the tide.
Yeah.
When pilots go through pilot training, it's very common for pilots to break up the systems, break up the various disciplines into chunks, and a person will become almost expert at that area and then teach the other squadron mates, training squadron mates, to bring them up to speed.
Yeah. Now, we had a couple of guys pretty sharp, and they would help tutor us. This one guy had the year at Cornell, and our class captain had the year at some college out near Chicago. And they would sort of tutor us to make sure that we were up to snuff. That story, you have to collaborate to graduate. Well, they collaborated with us, so we could all graduate. And even at that, the washout rate, in the Air Force, for our group, the washout rate was 66%. Was the washout rate.
What was the washout rate? You're breaking up a little bit.
The washout rate was 66%.
66%.
For washout.
And that is very common amongst, again, for those who are not very familiar with any of the specialized services, it's very common when you enter into your training for your training officer to say, look to your left, look to your right. Mm-hmm. Only one of you will be here at the end of it.
Those guys won't be here at the end.
Yeah. Now, at Tuskegee, there were also a number of people who were in support staff. And they were also called Tuskegee Airmen, even though they were men and women, which is very different than what happened in the U.S. Army Air Corps. And we have the 99s who repositioned aircraft, but they were civilians. At Tuskegee, they called the nurses, the engineers, the radio people, the nurses, the doctors. They were all Tuskegee Airmen, correct?
All Tuskegee Airmen. All together, during the course of the winter, there were 14,000 people that were Tuskegee Airmen. Men, women, nurses, doctors, dentists, the whole schmear. There were like 14,000 people that composed the entire group.
Okay.
Tuskegee Airmen.
The AT-6. Actually, let's go back to the Stearman, because that's a pretty classic aircraft, isn't it?
Yeah, that was a two-wing, two-cockpit airplane.
If Dr. Richardson, if I can ask you just to hold your phone still. I know it's a little bit uncomfortable for you there. There you go. Let's give it a second here. All right. Can you hear me okay?
I'm fine, yes.
Okay, excellent. So the Stearman is 2 seats, and that's one of the primary trainers. If you can hold the phone still, it'll help the picture come through a little bit more clear. There you go.
Hi.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect right there. So your instructor takes you up in the Stearman, open cockpit.
Yes, son.
And approximately how many hours did you have to fly that aircraft?
Altogether, I think it was about 60.
60, okay.
Yes.
And what was it like flying in an open cockpit? Did you feel like, well, I guess back then, the Red Baron and the idea of flying around in a biplane was still pretty romantic.
Yes, it was. I even tried to tie a ribbon under my helmet. So it was
really? Was the lifestyle very different than what you experienced as a civilian? Tell us about the differences between those two.
Well, in the military, of course, you have to get up at a certain time, and everything is done in formation. The sergeant blows the whistle, you come outside, you form up. He takes the attendance. And then you march in formation to the mess hall. And you're always in line. No matter what's going on, you're always in line. A line for something, a line to eat, a line for your chance to go to the latrine, a line for everything. You're always in line.
And yet, with all of that, one of the questions that has come from one of our viewers, who I affectionately know as Mamacita, she says, "So you became a family in spite of that. Everything's aligned, but you became a family."
Yes.
Are you still with the surviving members? Are you still very close with them?
Most of them passed on.
Yeah, that makes it very tough. I know with Chief Anderson, when he passed, that was so Chief Anderson was, for our guests, was the gentleman who flew around Eleanor Roosevelt that started off the civilian pilot training program. Without that initial flight, President Roosevelt would not have supported the idea of training what was then coined colored pilots. But after she got down off the flight, she says, "Well, I guess you can fly." So a very fortuitous set of events that all had to take place in a certain order to get us to where we are today.
Yeah, he lived in Bryn Mawr, not far from Philadelphia, Bryn Mawr.
Yeah, and so did Coach Draper.
Draper, he was one of our instructors. He lived in, I think he was in Ardmore, maybe. But they're very. Coach said he was Anderson's paper boy.
Well, I would have been okay with being Chief Anderson's paper boy also.
Mm-hmm.
He was a good pilot, very good pilot.
He supposedly taught himself to fly.
Yeah. Yeah, very few opportunities. 1929, you were, your Blackbirds group, 1929, a good chance that they were teaching themselves to fly because many of the flight schools would not allow people to take lessons.
They didn't take dark-skinned people for students.
Yeah. And so bringing us forward to today, my experience in training, like I said, I had that group I called my flying dads or flying fathers. It was, as a matter of fact, one of the instructors I had was a guy from South Carolina. And when I got called into his office, I said, when you hang up your gear, come to my office. I thought I was in trouble.
Oh, boy.
And walked into his office, and he says to me, just stand, take a load off, stand easy. He goes, as you were, stand easy. He goes, I've been hearing some good things about you, and I'm going to go flying with you tomorrow. And I was like, oh, I thought I was going to be in trouble. And we ended up being friends to this very day. So, you never know what you can expect out there. Mm-hmm. So to your point, go with excellence, do the best that you can, and continue pushing forward.
All right. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about after the Stearman, you went to the Vultee 13.
Yeah, Vultee 13, yes. We call it the Vultee vibrator. It was a low weight.
The Vultee vibrator.
Vultee vibrator. You can see the wings. You can see the wings flex. So we call this the vibrator.
And then what came after that? What aircraft came after that?
Well, after the basic, we went to the AT-6. And it was also a low-wing airplane, but had more power and had a retractable landing gear. And the basic plane was a fixed landing gear. But each time you moved up, the airplane became a little more complicated. So this is the first time now that you have landing gears to be concerned about. And the other airplanes, just make sure you kept the airplane straight and landed level. But now with this airplane, you have to be concerned about getting the landing gear down, make sure it's down and locked, and then you land.
So we've gone through all the nuts and bolts of the aircraft, but what was happening at home with regards to your family, friends? What was your experience with that? How were you remaining in touch with everybody?
Well, we wrote letters, try to write a couple letters a week, and you're always happy to receive letters. I didn't talk much, so I didn't write much. I guess my letters were quite short, and they're probably sort of repetitive, about the things we were doing every day and how you were coming along. But I was always happy to receive a letter from home. I understand that at home, the family was quite proud of me and quite excited for me and always prayed for me because they knew that things could happen in flying. I guess they were simply reading about plane crash in the newspaper, so they knew that things could happen. And no telephones are just too, no telephones back there, no cell phones. The regular telephone calls are too expensive, so your communication was by mail.
Dr. Richardson, if I can get you to speak up a little bit more, just hold the phone up just a little bit so the microphone's clear, so we can hear you clearly.
Okay.
That's better, yes.
We spent a lot of time, most of our communication was by mail. There were no phones, and telephone calls were extremely expensive, so your communication was by mail. And you're always happy to get a letter from home. And I think there's a song, a letter from home or something like that. And all the guys were happy to get a letter from home. Each morning you had mail call. The sergeant would pull mail out of a bag and call out a name, and you were anxiously waiting to hear if your name was called, so if you got a letter from home or from your girlfriend or from somebody. And
it was a big deal, wasn't it?
Huh?
It was a big deal to get mail.
Yes, definitely. Mm-hmm. A letter from home.
A letter from home. And hopefully it wasn't one of those letters from home.
Sometimes you got goodie packages. Sometimes you got packages.
What was your most memorable package?
Near my birthday, I got a lot of cookies in a package from home. It was near my birthday.
So a little bit of background. Once again, welcome to Mainline Weekend. My name is Victor Castro. This is Dr. Eugene Richardson. So I'm going to recount a story to you, Dr. Richardson, that I heard from another World War II vet. He was serving in another Tuskegee Airman, and they had captured some guy. They was going through the camp there, and it was a German officer, and he said something to the effect of, "We knew we were going to lose the war when in the fields of North Africa they found chocolate cake." And the thought was, if they can afford to bring chocolate cake over, we're done. We're just barely hanging on with fuel and ammunition, and they're bringing over chocolate cake and still fighting.
Cake, boy.
Yeah. So, but those cookies are good when they taste extra good. They're extra sweet. Oh, so yeah. you came out of the 1946. The atomic bomb gets dropped. What happens after that?
Well, they started cutting back. They started cutting back on things. They realized that things were over in Europe, and so they started cutting back on things. And then they also switched our airplanes. They switched us from P-40s to P-47s.
Okay.
P-40 was sort of similar to the P-51 that they were flying in Europe. But for Japan, for the Pacific, they wanted a heavier, more durable airplane, more
range?
Well, not only range, but also heavier armament. The P-47 had carried 8 guns. The P-40 carried 6. The P-47 carried 8 guns. And
hold that thought right there, Dr. Richardson.
Yeah.
So it looked like this.
That's the P-47, yes. Except not the earlier model with the glass house canopy, right? Yeah. And there are 4 guns
on
the wing. That's a good-looking model.
And go ahead and continue.
I said that's a good-looking model of a P-47.
Yeah.
And then that was the model I first flew. We had that model.
I know.
And later we got the...
I did my research. I went and got it.
P-30 model had a bubble canopy.
Yeah.
It has the greenhouse canopy.
Yeah, you definitely probably sweated in that. So after the war was over, the questions come up. You're Dr. Richardson. What type of career did you take on after the war was over in 40 and
I became a math and science.
Go ahead.
I became a math teacher in a middle school.
So you had to come back out of the military, finish up your last year of high school. You went to Temple University, and you went to Temple University High School.
Yeah.
What was that like after flying around in a P-47?
Well, fortunately, most of the students at Temple High School were veterans, so you didn't have to be concerned about being around a lot of younger kids. Most of the guys were veterans, and some of them had even been off. So you're accustomed to routine. You're into routine. So going to classes and studying was no big deal. because you
Yeah,
spent
I
years.
imagine after learning all the systems on the aircraft that high school was probably pretty easy.
Pretty simple stuff, yes.
So you went on to study, get your doctorate in education. You got your undergrad, then your master's and doctorate in education. You went on to become a principal in the Philadelphia school system, correct?
Yes.
And that was a pretty exciting time in the Philadelphia school district. We started aviation programs at Gratz and was it Simon Gratz, West Philly, and where else?
You said aviation program?
Well, they had that. Yeah, they had those aviation programs in the high schools in the 80s. And that was a result of some of the work that you'd done. We donated some simulators to West Philly and Gratz and Central.
Yeah, West Philadelphia had a Tuskegee Airman room. West Philadelphia High School. I'm trying to think of the lady's name that ran that, but that doesn't come to me.
So, for those of you coming in at the tail end of this, my name is Victor Castro. This is Mainline Weekend. We have Dr. Eugene Richardson. So let's take us into the last few minutes of this show here. What words of advice can you impart to our viewers that can help them get through this whole thing, post-COVID, pre-COVID, establish us going forward from here on out?
The main thing is having confidence in yourself, having the discipline to keep, to do the things necessary to, it's like the saying that they have: keep your eye on the prize, and keep your mind focused on what it is you want to accomplish, and things will generally work out. Don't doubt yourself, and don't let other people. Don't let other people give you negative thoughts.
All right, so we'll let that be the last word for this morning. Once again, Dr. Eugene Richardson is our guest. My name is Victor Castro. This is Mainline Weekend. Dr. Richardson, thank you for putting forth all this effort, and please make sure that you thank Miss Helen for putting up with both of us for the past 2 days with all the technological hurdles we went through to make this happen.
Well, I thank you, Victor, and she's within earshot, and she's busy working on her own a special program, Find Your Wings, that I mentioned to you and Melissa yesterday. And
let's talk about her program, because that's a very inspirational program.
Yeah, Find Your Wings is a curriculum for young people to help them. My notion is you got to find your wings before you can soar to your life's destination. And her curriculum involves young people learning their temperament, learning their preferences, learning about different intelligences, and how their intelligence fits in with all the things that they might want to do and things that can go on in life. And it's a great program, and we're just trying to move it along. It's for kids from 8 to something like 8 to 18. And
do you have a website for that, Dr. Richardson?
Well, again, Career Consciousness.
Career Consciousness. So if you Google that for our guests, you'll learn about the program, and you'll also see the name of Ms. Helen Richardson and Dr. Eugene Richardson.
Let her tell you more about it.
Okay, 2 seconds. It is Career Consciousness, and the website is www.careerc.com. And when you look on it and you see the Find Your Wings part on it, you will see a video that Eugene did for Comcast, which is for
Excellent.
Black History. So it's really, really nice. So,
well, thank you, Miss Helen. Have a great rest of the weekend. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks for the opportunity, Victor.
All right, Dr. Richardson. Thanks again.
Adios.
This is Mainline Weekend signing off. Enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye.